Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video discussion. Hurricane Carlotta, the topic of the day. A fairly well-defined eye right there. This area that you see here around it is known as the Central Dense Overcast, or CDO. And that's the sign of a fairly healthy tropical cyclone. You can also see the outflow going out clockwise away from the system, fairly well established, especially over here on the south and southwest quadrant. It is headed towards the coast of Mexico here, and it's going to linger there for a few days, which will present a big problem as far as flooding rains. And on the bigger picture, you can see a fairly well established overall envelope of energy here, just a fertile breeding ground for tropical activity across this region, a very large area of low pressure, what we call this monsoon trough, a focusing mechanism like a grapevine. And this system here, Carlotta, a very ripe grape, if you will, and hopefully it won't turn into a sour wine. Good analogy, right? As it approaches the Mexican coastline. But all kidding aside, this can be very serious, especially with the flooding rain potential, not to mention the possibility of hurricane conditions along that region. And it's situated right underneath, or very close to, an upper level anticyclone. If you remember from previous video outlooks here, I talked about how the wind has to go away from it in all directions, not across it in one direction. This is a fairly classic example of that, where you have the wind spreading out in a clockwise fashion way up the outflow levels to allow the air that's coming in at the surface to rise and be evacuated away efficiently, thus allowing that heat engine to continue. And those favorable conditions will probably persist as Carlotta approaches the southern Mexican coastline. Water temperatures extraordinarily warm. Everything in this area right here is 31 degrees Celsius. Everything in the red area is 30 plus. So we're talking upper 80s for ocean temperatures, upper 80s. That is very, very warm, no matter how you slice it. So Carlotta taking advantage of that very, very warm ocean water, lots of heat content, a lot of things going for it. So people in Mexico need to be preparing and take this very seriously. The forecast track from the Hurricane Center, what an odd year it's been. They don't seem to want to just make landfall this year. You remember that with Aletta and then Bud especially. So Carlotta, not breaking precedent, is going to come in, kind of skirt the coast. How far inland it gets, still hard to say. But tomorrow, late tonight into tomorrow, things are going to really go downhill. Heavy surf along the coastline, and then hurricane conditions possible. Forecast for the area, obviously. And then it's just going to kind of linger and weaken because it'll disturb the water underneath itself. It'll draw in dry air off of the Mexican mainland into the circulation, but the heavy rain threat will continue, so you'll lose a couple of those hazards, but the heavy rain will be a big problem. And as you know, if you have any familiarity with the Mexican geography, there are some high mountains through here, and flash flooding could be a big problem. Looking at the MJO pulse, this is all part and parcel to the favorable green area here, meaning upward motion is upon us with lots of air spreading out, divergence aloft, so that the air in the tropics can rise. You don't have that sinking or compression going on where the air is warm and dry. This is a juicy, divergent air mass all around in the tropics of the Western Hemisphere. Converse that to what's going on in the Indian Ocean with a lot of sinking motion, and we see over the next several days the Atlantic Basin generally favorable overall for upward motion, even as we go out towards the end of the month. And I expect that Africa will become more active with tropical waves over that area. And you can see that upward motion pulse, the MJO, and the water vapor imagery. Lots of moisture through here. There's the eye, the center of Carlotta. And if we go east into the Atlantic Basin, you can see that favorable upward motion pattern continuing. Just lots of moisture through here. Instability is at a plus this year. It's very favorable overall, even though it's June, and that's about the only thing going against development here in the Atlantic Basin right now is climatology, but a different pattern than we had last year, where there was a lot of dry, sinking air across the deep tropics Right now it's fairly favorable, but we just don't have anything to take advantage of it, which is good news. But just goes to show that even though you have favorable conditions, you don't always get development. Although Carlotta, definitely a development area in the Pacific. Looking at Africa, I expect that this will become much more convective over the next few days as that MJO pulse works its way through the Atlantic Basin and over Africa. We'll see large blossoms of these tropical waves here, and they will push westward out over the Atlantic, where sea surface temperatures are slightly above normal, and we'll take a look at that in more detail on Monday. We do that every Monday, but bottom line is things are slowly changing, although I still don't see any imminent development in the Atlantic. One area that we will be watching, it's a small feature, and it might just go away, but we do have a little surface low in the Northeast Gulf, very convective, if you will. Anybody with boating interest in this area, be aware of that. But I don't think that it'll develop into anything, and if it does, it should be short-lived as it moves generally off to the west here as high pressure builds to the north like a big warm water balloon. And this is a small but warm water balloon, and as this expands, it just kind of pushes this out of the way. I don't think it'll develop. We'll see if the Hurricane Center mentions it. If so, it will probably be just a low chance, since it is a pre-existing disturbance and a surface low over very warm water. You can't write it off, but I don't know. I don't think much will happen with it. Just be aware that it is there, especially if you have boating interests in that part of the Gulf of Mexico. So there it is, your update for today. Should have mentioned this is the update for Friday, June the 15th. Carlotta obviously grabbing the headlines, and our friends in Mexico who are watching this, be ready for that. A Category 1 or 2 hurricane is nothing to play around with, especially with all that warm ocean water. It could strengthen more rapidly than forecast. Remember, that is one of the weak points of the National Hurricane Center that they readily admit, is that intensity forecasting is where they have the least amount of skill. So be prepared. It's better to err on the side of caution. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. Glad to produce these videos for Hurricane and Hurricane HD. I'll be back here with another one tomorrow.